Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Professionals Podcast, the JP Podcast. I'm Hillel Bainach.
And I'm Benjamin Winters, and we're students at Yeshiva University, just looking for some advice.
Our aim is to bring to you Jewish professionals from every industry to learn from their successes and failures, how they grew in their career and Jewish identity, and made a Kiddush Hashem along the way.
We hope you can apply what you learned through the lessons to your own life as they pass the torch to us, the next generation. We can't wait to go along this journey with you. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast.
Woo! Welcome back to another episode of the JP Podcast, the Jewish Professionals Podcast. We've already heard that we're not dressed as nicely as our guest today, Ben.
I know. And usually we start off the episodes. Our first ever episode, we were wearing our suit. We were ready. We came in, and we toned it down a little bit. But obviously, our guest is going to outdress us.
But you're fitting very well into the real world today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we might have to throw back a tie on.
Exactly.
One. I mean,
exactly.
It's a little embarrassing. But we do have one of my favorite guests so far, Professor Stephen Mayer, an accomplished accountant. Ben, maybe just run us through some of his accolades.
Yeah, I mean, Professor Mayer worked in public accounting, got a CPA in 1983. He's been a leader in multiple different firms, and now is in academia at YU, a accounting teacher here, teaches accounting 1, accounting 2. We taught the more advanced courses now.
Can I add in that he's also the lead winner of Professor Awards? Is that true? Because I mean, that's what people have been telling me.
At the end of the day, that's the marker of who it is.
That's what they keep saying. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Professor, thank you for making the walk in.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Professor, we want to go all the way back.
Yes.
Growing up, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
So I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which is not what it is today. It was a very different neighborhood. Went to MTA for high school. And in MTA, I was never a great student. I just had no interest at all in doing any homework. In fact, I don't think I did homework since 3rd grade, literally. But in MTA, after 10th grade, now in 11th grade, you start taking electives, what they called electives. Today, of course, chemistry is routine and maybe a language is routine. So back then they gave me choices. I had chemistry or physics, neither of which I had any interest in, Spanish or French, neither of which I had any interest in, and they came up with a new elective. They just started in my 11th grade year called bookkeeping. And I said, that sounds great. So I took it. I loved it. I did very well in it. I took it in 11th and 12th grade, and I said, I'm going to be an accountant because I really enjoyed it.
My first thought when I hear bookkeeping is literal books.
It probably used to be, yeah. It used to be in the old days when everything was done with pencil, and debits and credits haven't changed, but the way things are done definitely has.
Definitely chalkboards involved too.
Today, yes.
Okay, so you're interested in bookkeeping, and then how did that progress?
Well, bookkeeping was really accounting 1. It was 2 years.
And you took that in high school?
Bookkeeping, and I took that in high school. Then when I went to college, I went to Baruch College. Accounting 1 and accounting 2 were very easy for me because I had already had the experience in it. And then, of course, I got into the other courses, and I just enjoyed it. It just clicked. That was the one thing that really clicked in my brain.
Was there no other subject you were ever sort of interested in? I know you ruled out the sciences.
The sciences were out. History bored me to death. I had no interest in anything. I really didn't. But I just found accounting to be very interesting. So then, of course, the business subjects, business management, marketing, things like that became interesting. I was never a math guy. So I even tell my class today, if it has to do with math, I'm out. Accounting is plus, minus, multiply, divide. That's it. That's what accounting is.
That's interesting.
There's no trigonometry. There's no geometry. There's no algebra. It's basically addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. That's what accounting is.
Right. People get really intimidated and think accounting is...
They say you must be good in math because you're an accountant. No, not at all. It's not math. I mean, especially today, everything's on Excel, but there's no math involved. Think of the classes you've taken. It's just adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing.
Okay, so you're going through that process. You're in Baruch, majoring, and...
I'm in Baruch, I'm majoring in accounting, and I decide in my sophomore year, at the end of my sophomore year, I go to the Baruch Placement Center. They had a great placement center where firms from the city would send in, we need an intern for this, we need somebody for that, and they would place people. It was great. And I went into it, and I met with this woman, and I don't remember her name, but she probably looked like she was 80 to me. She probably was in her 50s, but everybody looks older. And she meets with me, and I remember sitting like this with my hand over my mouth, and she says to me, young man, take your hand away from your mouth. You have a beautiful smile. And then she looks at my grades, because after my sophomore year, I had done poorly because I only had 2 accounting classes as a sophomore. And I did great in those, but everything else I did poorly in. She goes, with grades like this, you're never going to get a job.
Wow.
So that straightened me out. Then I started acing everything. And then after the junior year, I went back and I got a position at a firm called Goldstein Golub Kessler, which was a 75-person firm. Sounds more Jewish than it was, but it was pretty Jewish. I got an internship there, and that was in 1980. And in 2005, I became the managing partner of the firm.
You worked all the way
I
up.
was right, literally, as one of my partners used to say, from the mailroom, which wasn't quite the case, but I worked all the way up, became the managing partner. But that we had already been acquired by American Express in 1998, which was one of the first of these. Today is private equity. Back then,
Right.
American Express bought a lot of accounting firms.
We've had an American Express
You did?
employee on our podcast.
Maybe he was involved.
He was not. He and I spoke about it. He was in a different area, but we did speak about it. And then we were sold by American Express in 2005 to RSM, which is one of the largest firms today. And the culture changed immediately. It was a very different culture between what they were and what we were. And I think 80% of my partners left within the first year. I stayed 3 years, and then I left. I went to run another office of another firm. We did a merger. We merged into Eisner, which was a great merger. And then I became the managing partner of the New York office of what was then J.H. Cohen. It became Cohen-Resnick, which is one of the largest firms out there today, and has announced that they're doing a private equity transaction.
Can we go back to that
Please.
80/50-year-old woman telling you you're never going to get a job?
Mm-hmm.
What feeling does that elicit? Especially, you like bookkeeping, you like accounting. And now she's like,
but I was running a 2.8 index because in accounting I got 4.0.
Right.
But everything else I was doing C minuses. I just had no interest in history, political science, and everything else. I just didn't want to do the work. And I thought I'd coast my way through, but obviously I couldn't. So she really changed my life because she hit me with the whip, and I said, wow, I better straighten out. And of course I started taking more accounting classes and business classes as a junior. And so it was easier for me because I enjoyed it. And so I was able to ace it. I ended up with a 3.6 after 4 years, which wasn't
That's an
4.0,
improvement,
but it
though.
was,
Not
it was
too
great.
shabby.
It was great.
Wait, so do you think it was just a lack of effort? Like,
Completely. It wasn't a lack of brains. It was simply I had no interest. I was completely an underachiever since first grade. My parents would come home from parent-teacher conferences and say, your teacher says you're really great. I was a very good behaved kid in school. I wasn't one of these troublemakers, but you just don't do any work. I just didn't care. I had no interest. So I learned whatever I learned from listening, but I didn't learn enough to do well. But, I kind of just made my way through it. I went to MTA up here, and I was not a good student by any means. I was a 75 student, basically, which is what, a C student. And I was fortunate enough, I got into Baruch College, which back then I wasn't going anywhere else because I couldn't afford to. Mm-hmm. But Baruch was a good school. It was a great school for accounting and for business, and it still is. And I just found the right niche. I was very lucky.
that's good inspiration for any students watching. It's never too late. You can always pick up your act to improve.
That's a good way to put it. It's never too late.
Never
You
too
can
late.
always do it. And you should. Don't wait until it's too late, which is once you get out of college and you don't know what you want to do, figure out what you want to do in college.
I actually heard this story one time. We don't usually tell stories, but I want to tell a story. So there was this kid.
I'll allow it.
Okay, thank you, man. But there was this kid, and he was always terrible in school. And one day he got a mail in a message that he had to take whatever the SAT equivalent was, and he did it. And there was a few weeks later, he got his scores back, and he was in the top percentile. And it was crazy. And they sat him down you have so much potential. You didn't even study. It was incredible. So he started all of a sudden picking up his act. He did amazing. And he became this huge Fortune 500 CEO.
Wow.
They came into his office, or his parents sat him down one day, and they said, that test that changed your life, he said, you were part of a study about what would happen if they gave kids confidence. He said, you actually had these terrible scores. And
Whoa.
that completely changed his life.
That is amazing.
I
I can believe that 100% because I've heard of that type of thing. And a lot of it is just, getting somebody on the right track or having the right mentor or getting the confidence to do well. It's great.
I was going to say that's like a Goodwill Hunting story because the guy turns out to be a genius. But in this case, this guy, I don't know, did not get in the top percentage. And Turns into a Fortune 500 CEO.
Exactly. So when you're looking for that first internship, how did you go about it?
Well, I was able to get it through the school, through the Career Center.
Okay.
But I think, again, things were done differently back then where, schools or companies would send to the school, I have a need to hire, and we're not talking about the Big Eight, because there was Big Eight back then, not Big Four. But the other companies would say, the other firms would say, I need to hire 3 people. Can you send me some candidates? And they would send, obviously, good candidates. So I really got lucky. It's the only thing I can say. I got lucky. It was time and place, and it's better to be lucky than to be smart. But I will tell you, the best piece of advice I can give anybody, because I did it, I lived it, and continue to, is the expression goes, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I was very fortunate that from the beginning of my work experience, even as an intern, I loved what I did. I just enjoyed it. I was with the right people, I was with the right firm, and it just worked. And I never felt, no matter how hard I worked, I never felt that I was working. I always felt I was enjoying what I was doing.
Wow. How hard did you work when you first started off?
I think it's called like an animal. You worked hard, but it wasn't even just first starting off. It even got harder later. At first starting off, it was not like today where you go to these big Four firms, you put in 12, 13-hour days. It wasn't like that. The whole mindset was different. Financial services was not something back then. It started maybe a little bit later with hedge funds and private equity. So you didn't have those heavy concentration of busy season in the winter time. It was just very different. But for what was back then, I remember I was one of the first guys to get into the office, 6:45. Mind you, years later, I was getting in 6:45. But, and if I had to get a lot of work done, imagine what time I got in.
4:45.
Maybe.
Do you even go to sleep at that point?
I never slept well, which is another story. But so, I worked hard. I was putting in 60 hours a week, which is not investment banking hours, but 60 hours a week pretty much throughout the year, especially even as a partner, because I always wanted to be at the top. I always wanted to do better. And the only way to do better is you get in earlier, you stay later, and you work harder. And working harder doesn't necessarily mean, we're not digging ditches here. It means you got to do things right. You got to do things smart. I used to tell people, you go in and you say, I need work, I'm a little light. They give you work. You finish it up, you don't say, hey, I'm done. Maybe I won't say anything, because if I don't say anything, they won't give me any more work. That's great. You get home and that's wonderful, but go ask for more work, because you're going to do better. I became a partner in 9 years, not because I just let things lag, because I worked really hard at it, and I was lucky. I did the right things, and I knew the right people. So for me, it worked.
For some of our listeners that aren't as familiar, could you give a big picture description of what accounting is?
Okay, so accounting is, I think I used to say that it's being a trusted advisor to your clients. That's the ultimate the ultimate definition, I guess. That's not what you're doing in the first X number of years. You really have to do the drudge work. It's the partner, maybe the senior manager, that are the trusted advisors to the clients. But you go in and you're doing a lot of basic stuff, which may seem boring, but you're learning. And if you get to the 2 or 3 year period, you now start supervising people under you, and it just grows. And hopefully you enjoy it enough to want to stay and get to the point where you're always dealing with financial people. When you're an entry-level, junior-level person, you're dealing with the controller, maybe the CFO, and they may not look up to you because you're just a little guy, but when you get more experience, they start having respect for you. And I always said to people, I had many smart people who would leave the firm, and I would say, why are you leaving? Well, because I'm going to go work for a client and I'm going to make $10,000 more. Now, that was back then. Today, maybe you make 40 or 50 more. And I would say, yeah, but 5 years from now, if you stay in the CPA firm, you're going to be making substantially more. And when you work as an employee for a company, you're an employee. When you work as a public accountant for the company, you're an outside consultant. They pay you a huge, crazy number per hour. They look at you as a smart person who is helping them, even though you yourself might say, I'm really an idiot, I don't know anything, but they seem to think I'm pretty smart. And I can't tell you how many times I said that to myself over the years. But it's just different. It's a different role as a consultant versus being an employee.
Fake it till you make it.
That's one way to do it, exactly.
And
eventually they believe you.
Right. Or eventually you make it.
You make it, right?
Right.
Eventually you get to that level, right?
Well, I wanted to say, you said you felt like you never worked a day in your life. And for our audience who never met Professor Mayer, you happen to be probably the most positive person that's ever graced Washington Heights.
Well, I guess that's a compliment.
So how do you build that positivity, and how important is it? Can you stress that?
So I can tell you this, that today, as a teacher, and I'm finishing my 7th year as teaching. I retired.
Shemitah.
Shemitah, right. I retired in January of 2019 from Cohn-Resnick as a public accountant. And I started working as a teacher in the fall of 18 because I wanted to try it before I retired to see if I liked it. I taught a class at Baruch and a class at YU. And I loved it. Because I've been teaching and mentoring people my whole career. And to me, it's the same thing. And, I always said, as long as you know this much more than your clients, you're good. And as long as I know this much more than my students, I'm good. But I really enjoy it. The passion I get from teaching is because I like helping people. My students come to me, they ask me questions about careers, they ask me questions about accounting firms. I've introduced dozens of students to firms where they've gotten jobs for internships because it's easy. For me, it's easy. All I do is send an email. I know people. I have a great list of contacts. We can get into that in a minute. And it's just very easy. Why wouldn't I spend 5 minutes helping somebody? And I always used to say the difference between some people and other people is you go to somebody and you'll ask for some assistance, whether it's an introduction to a client, whether it's an introduction for a job, and helping somebody get a job obviously is a big mitzvah, but it's very rewarding to help somebody. The difference is spending 5 minutes of time thinking about it. Because if you go to anybody that has some contacts, if they don't do anything about it, it's because they don't want to spend the time or they're afraid you're not going to do a good job and they're going to look bad. My attitude is, let me make an introduction. If the firm hires you and they don't like you, it's not my fault, it's their fault. They shouldn't have hired you. It's okay.
Right, so when you're coming in as a junior accountant and you're working, you said coming in early, how do you keep that positivity? And you're working hard too.
Because I really enjoyed the people I was working for in my office, people I was working with, and I loved my clients. I had great clients that I enjoyed working with. Back in those days, everything was done manually. We didn't have the computer back then. You had these big mainframes, but they weren't doing the general day-to-day stuff. I had accounts where I would go down quarterly, and I would make all their journal entries every quarter. I'd have 40 journal entries a quarter. So picture yourself going through the balance sheet and the income statement as you do when we are in class and making journal entries. And I loved it because it was real work. I felt good. I felt like I was accomplishing something. And they were very appreciative of what I was doing. And then, things got more advanced and it became somewhat easier in that respect because I didn't have to make it by hand. They would do it internally because now they had the ability to do so. And the sophistication of companies has grown enormously over the years because today everybody has a controller or a CFO. Everything is computerized. So they're able to generate their own statements of cash flows. Right. I don't have to go in and do it for them. They generate it. All I have to do is check to make sure it looks right.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be further changing with AI? And how much?
The answer is I think it will be. I know this. Everything you read today says there's a major shortage of accountants. I'm not reading where they're saying that they're not hiring any more accountants because they're going to be using AI. AI, I think, is going to assist the accountants in doing the auditing, in coming up with footnotes, in analyzing transactions. It's going to help them do it. But AI itself, I could be all wrong. I just don't see it taking it over. Certainly not in the short term.
Got it. Interesting. So you were working through this accounting firm 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and you make it to partner. Can you tell us their story, something cool?
When I was a 2-year person, I was there literally 2 years. I was always one of two things. Either I never had a filter, and I just said what was on my mind, or I just was always because I'm a tall guy and I'm an in-your-face kind of guy, and I always had that way of doing things. And I walk into the managing partner's office, who knew me. Everybody was on a first name basis. There was no Mr., it was not like that. Everybody was first name, which was great.
The firm size at this point was how big?
100 people.
Okay.
But everybody was on a first name basis. It's like we were equals, yet not quite as equal, And I walked into him and I said, his name was Jerry Golub. I said, I'd like to have lunch with you. I said, I'd like to take you to lunch. Now, he wasn't going to let me take him to lunch. And he said, sure. So we picked a day, we went to lunch. And all I did was just sit and talk about, what I wanted to do and what I was doing. And he was talking, and we actually became very, very close. He and I, 20 years later, were as close as he was with anybody else in the firm, and he had many people who were his peers. He was 20 years older than me. But I just felt right away that I felt really good there. I felt very comfortable there. And as long as I stayed smart and stayed on top of the profession, meaning always reading and always understanding the new pronouncements that came out and the new things, I would be fine. And I used to talk to some of the partners there who I was very friendly with because I worked for them, talk about, everything was we, not you or the firm. It was we, because I considered myself a part of the firm, even though I wasn't a partner. But it was a mentality, because I felt it. I just felt like this was my firm, even though, of course, I wasn't a partner.
And nowadays, everyone sort of is sometimes looking for the next industry, the next job after one successful
1 year.
Right, 1 year, 2 years. You're always looking and bouncing. Did that never cross your mind? I know you said that you told the person who was leaving because they were going to make an extra $10,000.
What are you doing? Right?
Yeah. So that never crossed your mind?
Literally, one day, I was about 3 years in, and I was working on an engagement that was the most boring, I remember the name, but it's no longer around, the most boring engagement I ever worked on in my life. In fact, I kid today with the guy who was the manager on the job, who's 5 years older than me. We still communicate a lot, we talk a lot, and I tell him that there was a time on that job when I literally sat down one day with a piece of pen and paper, and I started writing my name and address. I was going to put together a resume, and then a phone rang, and I just threw it away, and that was the end of it. And I wasn't really looking to leave, but I hated what I was working on. And ultimately, I asked to get off that client, and they took me off and put some other poor sucker on that client because it was a boring job. But I loved it. I never, ever thought twice. In fact, when I was a partner, I made partner in 1990, and in 1995, a very close friend of mine knew a managing partner at another firm. And he said to me, "This guy wants to meet with you. You got to meet with him." "I don't want to meet with him. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in leaving. This is my firm. Why would I?" No, you got to meet with him. It's crazy." So I meet the guy one day. It was a Father's Day, and he lived not far from where I lived in New Jersey. So we met, and he's trying to convince me to come to him. And he offers me, let's see, what did he offer me? About $250,000.
Not quite.
For that, I might have gone. $250,000 more than what I was making, okay, which is a substantial, it was a multiple of what I was making. And I turned them down. And I said to myself, I guess it's not all about the money. I couldn't possibly go to that place. As it turns out, 2 years later, his partners threw him out. They threw him out. And my firm was being acquired by American Express, and which was like a complete game changer and in a totally positive way. So it was purely luck, because normally I'd say, hey, why wouldn't I jump for another $250,000? That's huge. But I was smart enough that I went in and told my managing partner about it, laughing about it. Can you imagine? This guy offered me $250,000 more, and I turned him down. How stupid am I? And of course, I got a huge raise that year.
That's awesome. What's that?
I knew that.
Wow.
What's that quote by, my name's Hillel, but from Rabbi Hillel? Like, if I'm here, everyone's here.
Imani Khan or Kol Khan.
Right. And if I'm not there, no one's there.
I like that. That's like saying the party doesn't start till I get there.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, if there's one thing that I would really put my finger on to say that this is what really propelled me, it really helped me the most in my career, it was networking. And I knew this from when I was a 3-year person. When I was a 3-year person, I went into one of our partners, an administrative partner, and he says to me, "Mayor, if you want to make more money, you're going to have to bring in business." Now, I was a 3-year person. Nobody brought in business in 3 years. You waited till you were a manager, a partner. "What do you mean?" "You got to meet people and, network and meet with the bankers who have clients and meet with lawyers who have clients, and you'll have clients and you exchange businesses." "Okay, I get it." He says, "You ought to look into it." So what do? I start looking into it. Now, there was no internet. I forget how, I found something. It was a UJA event. Oh, this is good. I'm Jewish. They're Jewish. This is nice. It'll fit comfortably. And I was just a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. And it was like $35. You go to an event, and it was all young professionals. Perfect. So I go to this event, and I'm walking around, and some woman comes up to me, and she says, "You're Steve, right?" "Yeah." I said, "Toby's husband, right?" "Yeah." She says, "How's Toby doing? Is she here?" I said, "No." She says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm networking." She goes, "This is a singles event."
No way.
So I promptly put on my jacket and slipped out the door. And I told my partner the next day, and he was a partner, I wasn't, we had a great laugh. But from that point on, I started networking. And that's why I was fortunate that I was able to make partner faster than most, because I was bringing in a lot of business. And so they how to make me a partner. You bring in business, you make more money, you make partner. And I will tell you that the one thing you must do, and you even as somebody in school, network, know people, try to reach out. My favorite line is I'm sitting with a guy who's a religious guy, he's a senior manager in the firm, doesn't network at all. He does his work, he's very good, but to get that next leg up, if business is great and they need another brain to do the work, he's the guy. But if business is just average, why would I want to share the profits with somebody else unless he's bringing in some top line revenue? So that's why you have a much better chance if you're bringing in business. So I'm sitting with him and I'm talking to him, and he's a firm guy and he's very quiet. You know, the kind of guy you put a paper under his nose to see if it moves because he's breathing, because you couldn't tell if he was dead or alive, but very smart guy. And I said to him, let me ask you something. You got a shul on Shabbos? He goes, yeah. I said, what do you do in shul? He goes, I daven. I said, let me tell you something. If you want to daven with kavanah, you stay home. You got a shul to network. You live in the 5 towns. Look around. What do you see? Hedge funds, private equity, real estate. I said, he looked at me like I had
Teacher,
4 eyes. Right. Yeah, he looked at me like I was out of my mind. And by the way, he ultimately left the firm because he didn't make partner. But you can do both. Look around, see who's there. You have friends of yours whose parents are in different businesses. People do business with people they like. So if you're a likable person, people are going to want to do business with you. And that's the way you build in any business that you're in. If you're in the real estate business, you want opportunities to buy buildings or to participate in investing in buildings. If you're in the hedge fund business, you need opportunities to get involved with some of the big groups that are some of the other hedge funds or some of the other private equity groups and be participants in some of their deals. Everything is about networking.
Oh, I'm still trying to hold in my laughter.
The singles event?
I mean,
Yes, that too.
Well, that's it.
I actually wrote a book.
You did?
I wrote a book. When I retired, before I retired, I said, I'm never going to remember every detail of my life. But I just, at the time I did, this was about 8-10 years ago. I said, I'm just going to start writing. And so I sat down, chapter 1, talked about the day I was born. Literally, I mean, what day was it? And I just went from, and I remember things from when I was 2 years old. I mean, crazy little stupid things that just aren't important in the real world. But I thought if I put it all down, it would be something my kids and grandkids would have. And at one point, I actually considered publishing it through Amazon just to see how Amazon works. I didn't think I'd make any money, but just to see how Amazon process works. But I decided I say too many things about too many people. It's not worth doing this. I couldn't publish it. But it was great. I put down every detail of everything that I could remember.
Where do we buy? Can we get a special copy?
I don't think so. But no problem with asking. You always got to ask.
Yeah, we'll promise not to leak it. It's a big problem in today's news, but
yeah, it's an issue. I actually sent it to an editor, a woman that I was recommended to in Israel. And she's an editor. She reads it and she, edits it, and I think that's great. So I speak with her on LinkedIn. She's an American. She lives in Israel. She charges $35 an hour, which is peanuts. I said, great. So I send it to her, and she comes back to me after the weekend, and she says, I really don't think I can work on this with you. I said, why not? She goes, it's too much Lashon Hara.
oh my goodness.
Okay, no problem.
Right, there goes your paycheck.
So
I think the professor is taking best storyteller to ever grace this podcast.
There we go. I mean, we spoke a lot about networking.
Yes.
But I want to circle back to something you said when you denied the $250,000 pay raise. When you said it's not all about the money.
So I would have told you, I thought to myself all the years, listen, I always wanted a great raise. I always pushed for more. And again, we was a very friendly group of people. Doesn't mean they gave it away by any means, but we have very open discussions about why I think I deserve more. Even as a kid, I went from my first year making $15,500. I think the raise went up to $19,500. Now that's a huge percentage. $4,000 on $15,500 is more than 25%. On the other hand, I'm still making $19,500, but in those days you could live on that. So, but we were always very open and talking about things like that. So it was an easy discussion. So I always felt, listen, you work real hard. I want to get paid. That's the only way, as a partner of mine used to say, and somewhat crudely, that the only way to keep score is by looking at the money. Who has the most money? That's the only way to keep score, which I don't buy. But giving up that kind of money, at first, it was an easy decision because I didn't want to work with those people. It was about being happy with the group. And so it wasn't a hard decision, but yes, you go to work, you want to be fairly compensated. And, no matter what you do, no matter what business, you always want to feel like you're making the right amount of money.
Your wife probably wasn't too happy.
No, she was. She knew I was making the right decision, actually.
Wow.
It by far was the right decision. In hindsight, it was absolutely the right decision.
That's true. But nowadays, I feel like kids coming out of college are always looking for that extra push of, at least some of the wanting more money is in competition with other people. What does it take to say no to that when you know what you're turning down?
So, I mean, again, you always want to get the most money, and you deserve the most money you can get. There's no doubt. But there is more than just that. You have to be in an environment where you're going to be happy. If you interned at a place and you really loved it, okay? In the summer, you had an internship, and then you go out and you interview, and you get another job. You get a job with another firm. But you really enjoyed the place you interned at. There was good camaraderie. You felt good about the people. If it's a few bucks less, take it. Because if you enjoy what you do, not only do you not work a day in your life, but you do better. You do better at what you do when you're in a comfortable place where you feel comfortable. So the fact that they offered you, and again, I'm using a few bucks, just like a layperson. I mean, I don't know literally how to quantify it, but it's okay. You'll make it up later.
Yeah. And kind of going to the bring in business you mentioned, what was your process? How did you go about it?
So the first thing I did was, I was already working, remember. See, today, it's easier for you guys. You have LinkedIn, you have Facebook, you have Instagram, you have things that you connect. You're connected to many more people today than I ever was connected to, except you're not talking business with them. You're saying, hey, what's up? Where'd you go on vacation? At some point, when you're out of school and they're out of school, talk about business. What do? Oh, you do that? Can I meet with you and your boss? He looks great. His boss is happy that he brought somebody in because his boss sees he's networking, so he's happy to bring you in with your boss. You just don't know. You never know what causes a connection. It is the most important thing. I started by looking at my clients. I had 20 or 30 clients. Each one had a banker. Each one had a lawyer. So I said, I want to get a list of those and call people up. How you doing? We work on this and this account together. We've met or we haven't met. Let's get together for lunch. And the firm was happy to pay for me to go to lunch. So I didn't have to feel like I'm not making a lot of money, but I'm putting money out of my own pocket here. The firm was happy to reimburse me as long as I could show results. And I did. I was very fortunate.
It's a good pickup line. You email someone, you want free lunch?
That's in the header, yeah. When you did switch firms, what year was that and what was the process like?
So it was a very easy process. What happened was, as I said, my firm was sold to American Express in 1998. In 2005, American Express sold all their accounting firms. They had about 40 or 50 throughout the country, smaller firms. We were one of the big ones. They sold us to RSM. Completely different personality, different culture, and it wasn't us. We were Jewish and Italian guys from New York. They were much more Midwestern, just a very different group of people. They make a ton of money. They're very large today. They're not doing something wrong. It didn't work for us. So I was running the firm for 3 years, and I remember literally going to meetings and coming back at 6 p.m. from the office, from inside the office, going back to my office to now sit down and try to do some work. And I'd look at one of my partners and I'd say to him, another 10-hour meeting, just nothing accomplished. It was a different culture. It wasn't who I was. So I got a call out of the blue from a senior partner at a firm called Amper, Politziner, and Mattia, Amper. And they were a Jersey-based firm with a New York office. And he asked me if we could talk. And I said, sure. He got me at the right time. So I met with him, his brother, who was a senior guy, and the managing partner of the firm. We met in Jersey one day. And in 10 minutes, I knew we hit it off. It was just great. It was just guys like me looking to make money, have fun, service clients. It was just a great group of people. Sure enough. So they hire me. I hadn't yet told the place that I'm leaving. And then I ultimately told them it was the summer of 2008. And the guy says to me, well, why don't you just take some time off? You're probably burnt out. I'm not burnt out. I don't want to be here anymore. So I left. It was the first time in my life that I was out of work. Literally, it was over Sukkot. I had like 2 weeks where I was not employed. And it was the best. I had no stress, no pressure, no emails. It was very relaxing. And then I ran the New York office. And 2 years later, we merged with Eisner. Notice I said we. It's always we. We merged with Eisner. I was involved in that for 6 months in the whole merger, and I knew the Eisner people very well. It's a great merger for them. And of course, many years later, they sold to private equity, and everybody did great. So it just worked out. I was just ready for it. And then I left there because I didn't really have a role. I wasn't going to run their New York office. Eisner was a very large firm. They had their New York office. They said to me, just stay, give it a year. You're going to see we're going to find the right spot for you. I probably would have run their New Jersey office, which would have been fine. But I got this opportunity to run Cohn-Resnick's New York office, which was even bigger. And I took it. And it was great. And I retired from there. And it was fine.
Did you ever consider starting your own thing?
Never. Because I always liked support around me. I always needed the support. So I liked being the guy who was the advisor to the client, but I needed somebody to do the work. So, it's just so much work you can do as a partner. You have the people underneath you, and I just didn't want to do that. And plus, when you start your own firm, you're usually working with smaller clients to start with. It's not like I was a guy who was, you see this with lawyers a lot. They're working on a major client, big, let's say, private equity group, and they say, why don't you go out on your own and we'll go with you. Well, okay, then you continue doing the same work you're doing at a high level, and you're going out on your own, and it's a great boost. I would have had to start from the bottom, and I just had no interest.
It's so interesting then that we get to meet with people that they're so different. So many people want to start their own thing, want to start with new young clients. And
Right.
It's so important to know what you want and who you are.
Right. I knew who I was. I needed and wanted the support. I needed the people under me. And as a partner, I always had very strong people under me because they needed to do the work. I would review everything, and I would be the guy to sit with the client, but I needed to know that the work was getting done properly. So I needed a strong team.
Transitioning now to the sort of the more Jewish aspect of our podcast. I know in accounting there's something called busy season. And during busy season, the hours are higher, the pressure's ticking up. Could you maybe tell us what that's like while also balancing an Orthodox lifestyle and any stories that come to mind?
Yes, many, unfortunately. Yes, so what happens is, when I started, obviously, in the early 80s, you didn't wear a yarmulke to work. It was just different. Probably 5 or 7 years later, it became more common. And I was with a firm that was Jewish, and they gave you off for the Yom Tovim. You didn't have a problem. It wasn't part of your vacation.
So like
they
Yeshiva
gave you
University.
that time off.
Yeah, it's a Yeshiva University
okay,
firm.
Right. And so it was very different. I guess times have changed, obviously, in how things are done. And it's hard. It's hard being a frum guy in the real world, only because you're always, first of all, you feel a little bit, I'll say guilty, because you're leaving early Friday, or you're not there for the holidays. Although you're not there for the holidays, it's okay. Today everything works on what's called PTO. Years ago, you had 4 weeks of vacation. Today, they use the term PTO. PTO means you get paid time off. Same thing as vacation, except, for example, if I want to take off on President's Day and my firm is open, I just take off. It's PTO. Now, obviously, you make sure that the work is being handled. You're not leaving anything behind. If I need to take off for Sukkot, I just schedule it. I'm off, and that's it. So, it's okay. Again, as long as there's no deadlines and things are crazy, where even then you're going to take off, but then you feel bad. So the biggest concern I always had, especially in accounting, because accounting, there's minimum number of hours you have to put in during busy season. You leave early on Friday. Guys do it in 2 ways. Some guys take advantage of it, and they leave at 12 o'clock. Now, no matter how far you live, Shabbos starts at 4, let's say, the earliest. You don't have to leave at 12. And make sure you're putting in those hours on Sunday. Now, most other people are working on Saturdays, but you can do it Sundays. In my firm originally, we had 10 or 20 guys that would come in Saturday night. These were all married guys with kids. They slept all day Shabbos. The kids they put to sleep. They came in 8 o'clock on Shabbos night. They'd work till 4 in the morning. Then they'd go home. Why? Because that balanced their lifestyle. They put in their time, and they were home on Sunday when the kids were up, and they got to spend time with the family. Everybody does how they want to do it. Now, today, everything is a lot more remote, and you can work from anywhere, so it's much easier than it was then. Then you had to be in the office. I think it's very important, though, to show that you're putting in the same time as everybody else, and you're committed to whatever project you're working on, even though you can't work on Saturday. Otherwise, it gives you a bad name, and of course, it gives Orthodox Jews a bad name.
That picture that pinned in my mind of all of you guys coming in Saturday night.
Nuts.
Yeah,
Nuts.
I think you still have your Shabbos clothes on.
Unfortunately, many of them probably did. I never came in Saturday night, but I would have come in jeans.
Bring the Shabbos leftovers for
I'm sure they had shillent all night.
Exactly. Well, that is what culture is. People talk so much about how important culture is. What do you look for when you keep talking about these companies worked for that everyone just loved it?
So, as an example, I will tell you, most people that worked in my first firm loved it. We had a reunion 2 years ago. partners, staff. There were a couple of hundred people that were there at a bar in the city, and everybody was there because they liked being there, even though they may have only been there for 3 or 4 years and then left. But they remember the days of being there. And I remember talking to people at that meeting where they were 3, 4, 5, year people at the time. They were only in the firm a few years, and it was great. We had a great time because we all had fun times together. There were many out-of-town jobs. So I remember, and the most relationship-building times that you have with people you work with is when you're out of town together. So literally, I'd go out of town for 2 weeks at a time, and you'd work like a dog to try to get it done because you wanted to get back. But you had a great time. You'd go out Saturday night to a bar just to hang out. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun. So you really built up great relationships.
Do you think it's on like the senior people to build that culture?
It's on the senior people to set the tone. Yes.
And as a younger guy, how do you contribute?
It's a good question. People do. I will tell you that years ago, and I don't know what's done today, maybe it's not appropriate today, but years ago they used to do bar crawls. So they'd have a whole thing set up on the Upper West Side. They're going to 6 different bars. Now, I'm not a drinker. I never went. And it was usually Friday nights. But there was always 1 or 2 partners that would go just because they liked going. They wanted to
relatable,
drink.
right.
Yeah, and they picked up the tab. And, or 1 or 2 senior managers. And people had a great time. And that's what builds the camaraderie. First of all, that's what builds the connection between the partner and the staff person, because you're in the same boat. You're both sitting there having a drink. Everybody's casual. There's no, you work for me. It's none of that stuff. But I think today, the issue that I think Orthodox people have, and it's not necessarily an issue, but the problem that I think firms find is, especially the big 4 firms had found this in the past, Orthodox Jews, we get married young. We have kids young. So by the time you're out of school, starting work, you could be married with a kid. It's not that unlikely. You don't have the same feeling for wanting to put in those hours, for wanting to build that camaraderie with your fellow people, fellow staff members, because you're busy. You want to get home. You want to get home to your spouse. You want to get home to your kid. So and they feel it. And then after 2 years, they pick up and they leave. And that's why I think for a number of years, while you had the issue where a lot of the big 4 firms didn't want to recruit here, because the YU kids were the first ones out. They left quickly. Understandably so, but they did. Today, it's different. I think people still leave quickly, but firms are desperate for people. So they don't care about the fact. They want to get people in. And YU students are excellent workers. YU students it's a different personality when they hire a YU student than others. And I used to say years ago, when you hire a frum kid, this goes back 40 years ago and it applies probably today as well. You have a kid who has gone to shul for 20 years. He's worn a suit or a sport jacket and slacks, let's say in recent years, or maybe like me, no jacket.
Or like us.
Right, exactly. Or like this, right?
It didn't have to. That was subtle.
I do the same thing.
I see what you did there, Professor.
But you've gone up to the rabbi. You've gone up to your parents' friends. You've looked them in the eye and you've shaken their hand. You know how to do that. Not everybody does. When I taught at Baruch, I had a guy come up to me. He wanted me to help him get an internship, which I did. And he gives me a handshake, and it was the dead fish rabbinical handshake. No. And I said to him, dude, you're never going to get a job like that.
Go to the gym.
Look me in the eye. And it was a big guy.
Not
shake
go
my
to
hands.
shul.
No, go to shul, right. Wasn't a Jewish guy. And I said, you gotta present. You can't present like this. Come on. And I think that's an advantage that I'm going to say we still have, but we certainly had many years ago. I'm not sure if we still have, because I think other people, do this as well.
Picked up the tab on being more professional.
When I was interviewing back in 1980, I was interviewing with firms for a full-time job. I had some very close friends that I was at Baruch with, and we were in accounting together, and we competed with each other, and with the CPA exam, we studied together. It was great. I'm not Jewish. One guy said to me, I have one suit. It's a green suit. I wear it on my first interview. I don't know what I'm going to do for my second interview because they're going to notice I'm wearing the same suit. I mean, he wasn't a frum guy. He didn't go to shul on Shabbos. Me, I had 3 suits to pick from, a blue, a gray, and whatever, a brown. So at least I could mix it up because I would go to shul every week. I had to have a suit. It was just different.
I don't know about green either.
Maybe,
green was not good.
Maybe he was just the Masters golfer and he won the green jacket over here.
That could be. By the way, brilliant guy who ended up in Merrill Lynch for 40 years in accounting, but in the legal department, he was just a brilliant.
Amazing.
Sounds like he wants to come on the podcast, Professor.
We like to ask all our guests a closing question about something that they've learned, a skill or an experience from that's specific to their industry. So in your case, accounting, that applies to all industries. That applies to your lawyers, your investment bankers.
Look how excited he is.
Teachers,
Look how excited.
whatever industry.
This is a favorite question.
Whatever industry. What would you say that is from accounting?
Has to be networking. Has to be. Because no matter what business you're in, you must network unless you just want to be the guy doing the drudge work the rest of your life. But to get ahead, you want to network. You want to try to move up. You want to try to meet other people. Even for your own career, in case you're not happy, you know other people and other businesses within your industry. That's the way to do it. You got to know people. It's not what you know, it's who you know. That's the expression, but it's very true.
Network is net worth.
Network, that's good. Network is net worth. I never heard that one. That's good.
I just thought of something. You said earlier that it's never too late to start.
No.
And it's also never too early. It's never too early to network.
Right.
So it's never too early, never too
Today,
late.
guys in college are networking, which is not something I ever did, of course. But it's never too late, but you got to go at it much faster. You got to double down on it because you want to. That senior manager that I spoke to about the shul comment, I mean, he wasn't interested. He had a wife and kids at home. He wasn't interested in going out to events after work to meet people. Just wasn't him. Okay, that's fine. So, I'm sure he's doing great. I'm sure he's making a living. But guys could do much better and advance and have much more fun and be more successful, however you define success. It's not necessarily money,
right?
But you could be more successful if you do that. You must network. You must get to know people.
Do you have any last takeaways as a Jewish professional in the workplace?
Jewish professional.
Be true to yourself. Do what's right for you. Do what's good for you. I had a student ask me a few semesters back, clearly a yeshiva student. He was in the, the yeshiva program. And he comes up to me, and he's in accounting, obviously, and he says, I want to be an accountant, but when I go into working full-time, am I going to have time to sit and learn? And I said to him, yeah, you're going to get up at 4:30 in the morning, you're going to go to shul, you're going to do daf yomi, then you're going to daven, then you're going to get to your office before 8. Then when you leave the office at night, on the train home, you're going to learn, and when you get home, you're more than welcome to learn again. And he looked at me like I was crazy. I said, you think you're going to be able to take 2 hours off in the middle of the day to sit and learn? No, you've got to make up your mind. If you're an accountant, you're an accountant. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have spare time. How do you want to spend it? If you're married and you have kids, obviously you're not going to be sitting and learning probably. You're going to be spending the time with your wife and kids. Everybody has to make decisions. Life is all about decisions. You decide what's good for you. If that's not what you want, then maybe you go to a smaller firm. Maybe you go to a firm. There are many firms that are owned and run, and all the staff there are religious people. And so you get off all the Yom Tovim. You never have to worry about it. It's a different environment and not as cutthroat. That's up to you. That's okay. You'll make a good living, but you have to decide what you want to do.
Thank you so much, Professor. And
my pleasure.
If you have any future single events send them my way.
You get
There
them
we
all.
go.
Both of you.
There we go.
You can split them.
There we go. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the JP Podcast. Special shout out to Josh behind the camera, to Ashley, to JB, to our whole team. And thanks again to Professor Mayer for coming on.
My pleasure.